welcome into this week's book club episode for Star Wars Most Wanted by Rae Carson. We're breaking down this book 2 chapters at a time. In fact, we're almost done going through this book and discussing the themes and happenings and talking about characters, which has been my favorite part of going through this book. If you're not familiar with the series, you can go back to the beginning and kind of go along at your own pace, or catch up with us, or pick up now, whatever you want to do. But you can go ahead and click here and it'll take you back to the beginning. This week we are discussing chapters 17 and 18. So this is the point where everything comes together. This is Han and Qi'ra and Sulu, and they have met the engineer, and they're getting everything together, and we're going to figure out how they're going to save their skins and kind of get to the life that we see them in Solo, a Star Wars story. So the first chapter we're in is Qi'ra's perspective, and it's something that she's been needing. So we open up with her actually getting to get cleaned up and take a shower and put on some clean clothes, and she and Han and Sulu are taken away to this bunk room, and they each get their own bunk, and they're in like a comfort mattress, like a foam mattress, but better because it's like a space foam mattress, and they're able to actually get some sleep, and they sleep for 10 hours and then wake up and go get food. Qi'ra says food is the only thing that could really get her up. And here is a chapter where the feelings between her and Han are getting to be a little bit more overt. They're never really overly overt in this book, per se, at least not to the extent where this book isn't really written like a romance novel, but because we know where things are going, we can kind of see how things are bubbling between them. And I say that just to point out some of the interactions between Han and Qi'ra in these chapters, because we're starting to get to that Han that we kind of know more from A New Hope, that Han of he gets frustrated and doesn't understand his own feelings and is afraid of his own feelings, so then he gets angry and he doesn't really know how to respond to things. So at this point, Han and Sulu step out of the room so Qi'ra can get dressed. Qi'ra takes a little while getting dressed because she's admiring and also mourning her clothes. These are the same clothes she got earlier in the book that were so stunning and so beautiful that she loved so much, and now, the skirt's ripped and the clothes have lost their color, but she's also marveling in how much the clothes have been able to be salvaged from what they were, and she's happy to have them back. She leaves the room, and Han gets snippish with her, he's like, "What took you so long?" And Kira's like, Han can be mean, but he's never, intentionally, directly mean in the way that comment is. And it points out that Han recognizes that's what he did. Basically, Han's a little bit hangry, and he really wants to get to food. But he also has that kind of compassionate moment where he realizes he was being hangry, and he wants to, correct it. So, he slips up, but he corrects himself. But it's also not just his anger, but Qi'ra's reaction to it, the kind of hurt over his anger, in the same way where she probably wouldn't have been hurt by it at the beginning of this book. They head to the room where they met the engineer before, and there's a whole spread of food. Really, really wonderful food, right down to delicacies for Rhodians. So the engineer's kind of gone above and beyond, making sure that there's food that they would all like, and they just start scarfing the food down. They're just shoveling it in and savoring it, to the point where the engineer makes a comment of, "Well, we set out silverware, but this works too." And all three of them become aware that they look like the street kids that they are, who are just really wanting a meal, and then decide that they don't care and they just keep eating food anyway. I like that Carson's points out that they start to get sick because they're eating this really rich food. And that's something that is very realistic. It's a very common thing for people who are malnourished to get good food for the first time, and it can actually make them really sick. And in fact, people who are getting in a better situation after malnourishment have to eat a very specific diet to get used to nutrients again. I don't know if that was a misstep on the engineer's part, if that was a tactical play on the engineer's part, or just something that happened to explain that. But this book has been really good at least from my not really educated, but just kind of, I don't know, I think it would be giving myself too much credit to say that I have that much of an awareness either, but I feel like the book has been very good about saying, this is what it looks like to live this kind of life and to be under this kind of mental duress and stress and abuse that these kids have been under, to the point where, it doesn't necessarily bring down the mood. It's still a Star Wars book. I still have fun reading this. I still feel good reading this. I still leave the book feeling happy, but it also doesn't let you forget the really horrible situation these kids were in throughout their whole life, and the illness over the food is just another point where it does that, and it adds this extra thing that they have to work through where, you know, they're trying to negotiate for their lives and they also feel queasy. So I just thought that was a really good detail to add, and how they kind of eat through that stress, because at the end of the day, they really want a good meal because it's first one they've had for Sulo, first one in a while. For Han and Qi'ra, maybe the first one ever to have a meal like this. It's at this point they tell the engineer their story, or Qi'ra does. She largely tells the story. Han chimes in with details only he would know, and he translates for Sulo, who's chiming in, and they get to tell their story, and then they ask the engineer. Engineer tells them a little bit about her story. Han becomes enamored with the idea that she has the ship and she can just run away and go to space. And the engineer makes a comment about, you know, Han, would he like a starship someday? And Han mentally is like, why would I ever own a starship? And he's like, no, I have a speeder and that would be enough. And the engineer again makes a comment of, ooh, you know, you have, you know, low ambition is good too, or something to that extent. And so she's starting to judge them, and it's becoming pretty obvious that she has a high opinion of Qi'ra, who she calls over to sit by her, and maybe certainly a lesser opinion of Han, and maybe an indifferent opinion to Sulo. And that's something that's building up to what we see in chapter 18. Qi'ra is becoming very suspicious of all of this because she doesn't understand why the engineer would be so nice to him, and she comes to the conclusion that the engineer's being nice to them because she still needs something. And Qi'ra immediately starts thinking about what that could be and realizes that the engineer is in a bind for how to do the second auction. But Qi'ra aptly points out that with increased Imperial presence, it's harder for the engineer to move around and use her resources, and so she needs help. And that's when Qi'ra hatches a plan. We then hop over to Han's perspective in chapter 18, and it's pretty obvious from the first couple of lines that Han is starting to fall for Qi'ra, that he talks about how her smile does things that he doesn't understand, like make him feel like he could actually have a starship. And when you see things like Qi'ra defending Han throughout chapter 17 and even in chapter 18, as we'll get to, you can see that Kira's possibly feeling the same way too. They're just two people who don't necessarily understand what they're feeling or wanting to admit what they're feeling. But they're getting that kind of dynamic. I appreciate about the three of them, and I think I talked about this a couple of videos ago too, but I like that you get this growth between Han and Qi'ra, but Sulo, who is kind of a third wheel, is also never really treated like a third wheel, that he's along for the ride and they care about him too. So you're seeing friendship, and you're seeing friendship between this group of people, and whatever is blooming between Han and Qi'ra is blooming because of a friendship, and the proof that there's friendship is Sulo being there. I think in a book that's supposed to be about Han and Qi'ra, their backstory, you really easily could have conceived of this story and not had a character like Sulo. Why not make it about Han and Qi'ra against the world and against the galaxy? Why add a character like Sulo? Sulo, I think, is important for several reasons. One, you have Han and Qi'ra who are total opposites, but neither of them have the kind of tech knowledge that Sulo has, so just practically speaking, he fills a role. But I think it's that friendship thing. It proves that there is this foundation beyond horny teenagers, right? That, you know, that is an element, but that's not the only thing going on here, and it's characters who are not necessarily inclined to trust, who are given a character to show that they're learning how to trust, without the ulterior motive. I don't want to say ulterior motive because that makes it sound like any romance between them is intrinsically bad, which is it's not. I think it both enhances the friendship between Han and Qi'ra as that foundation to show that they can have that friendship with somebody that they would not be romantically interested in, while at the same time enhances a romance there, because it proves that it's growing out of a foundation and not just two humans stuck with the only other human running for their lives, something that would just be like this emotional cocktail of feelings and not something that could be deeper. And I think the deeper relationship there is more meaningful to what we see in Solo, than the film, than if it was just, you know, kids having a fling. But as I said, Han's starting to feel that way. You know, he talks about how, like, her belief in him can get his belief up, and he's trying to talk himself down. Han's always that good guy who's trying to talk himself into being cynical, I guess. But it's now from his perspective that we hear Qi'ra's plan, and Qi'ra's plan is effectively get the White Worms to broker the deal. The White Worms are never going to have enough money to get the shield plans to sell them back. Qi'ra's aware of this. There's just no way to bring Lady Proxima to the table as a bidder. But if the engineer needs to get around Imperials, she can bring Lady Proxima to the table as a broker and say she knows connections, she knows places. Han brings up that they have guards, that they can protect them on the planet. And basically, her plan is to get Proxima involved with the deal without having to take part in the deal, so then Proxima is getting money instead of having to give money, and it ends up being an even better situation for her, keeping Han and Qi'ra and Sulo safe. It's at this point that Han and Qi'ra are dealing with the reality that they're fighting hard to get home, and home is the White Worm's den, and they just really don't want to go back. They're starting to enjoy this freedom, they're seeing the opulence of other places they could be, and they have to fight to get back. Basically, they're struggling to get back to a really crappy situation, and they're having to deal with that. And also, as this goes on, Han is seeing that something is bothering Qi'ra, and maybe that is just that realization. Maybe it is the fear of how this deal is going to go, or maybe it's something else. Maybe it's Han seeing her suspicions of the engineer being up to something. But Han is clearly watching Qi'ra closely. At this point, they get on the horn with Lady Proxima, and Proxima is feigning caring about her children, how she just wants to bring them home, bring them back, and make everything okay. And Han is trying really hard not to wreck it with his comment of, yeah, we just didn't want to die. Proxima is trying to pretend like she's this great, amazing leader. But what Han comments on is how great Qi'ra is at negotiating what she negotiates. How she can flatter Proxima, something that Han doesn't think he'd be able to do because he doesn't like her that much. How Qi'ra can kind of twist her words so Proxima feels like all of this is her idea. It was Sulo's idea to make the deal contingent on them getting to return home. Han adds in, hey, we need to double rations. And this is a good point for Han's character, because he doesn't just say double the rations for Han, Qi'ra, and Sulo, but double the rations for everybody. Han still cares about the White Worm gang as a whole. And that's something, that kind of interjection makes Qi'ra nervous, but Qi'ra also, I think, respects that Han's worried about that kind of thing. The call ultimately goes well. Proxima negotiates for a better deal than even Qi'ra had negotiated, even though it was still a really good deal for Proxima. Proxima pretends to be insulted because she's only getting less than a percentage on the whole deal, even though it would be a lot of money. I like the way Qi'ra presents this, where she's like, oh, you would get X number times more than you had bid back, and Proxima still wants to know the percentage. And when Qi'ra tells Proxima how small it is, Proxima is offended, and it was Kira's way of maybe not having to admit that, but if she does, it's like this kind of side way of saying to Proxima how embarrassingly low her bid was. So she's presenting Proxima with a way to save face. Proxima doesn't take it. And then she basically tells Proxima that she's out of her depth without having to tell Proxima she's out of her depth. So that was a really good play on Kira's wording as well. The call ends. Han comments about how good Qi'ra was on the call. The engineer wants to now talk to Qi'ra alone. Qi'ra is worried about talking by herself to the engineer, so she says that Han and Sulo can stay, that anything that needs to be said can be said in front of them, and that's when the engineer offers Qi'ra a job, saying she would need training and grooming and would need to be able to grow at it, but basically says, I see a lot of myself in you, that if you had had the same opportunities I had, maybe you could have been an engineer, and I want to give you that opportunity. And everyone's taking this differently. Obviously, Qi'ra is struggling because it's obviously a great deal. It's obviously something she wants, or she thinks she should want, right? She could live where she wants. She would get this step forward into a perfect opportunity to take care of, to become what she wants, that she could have basically a stepping stone, a shortcut right into having these connections and this power that she's been wanting the whole book. Sulo is a little sad because he wanted to be an engineer, so this is kind of hurting him in that way. We don't really know all of how Sulo felt. He might have been sad about losing Qi'ra as well. We're just picking up on Han's perspective of Sulo's nonverbal cues. And then Han is struggling because obviously why wouldn't Qi'ra take it? And Han's starting to fall for Qi'ra, and he doesn't know how to handle this. He knows that he shouldn't just tell Qi'ra what she should do, but he wants Qi'ra to stay with her, and he realizes that it's going to be hard enough to go back to the White Worms and do everything he has to do with the White Worms and eat the sludge and all of that, but to do all of that and not have Qi'ra, he's now really sure he's not sure he could go back and just live his life with his speeder and not have this person in his life that's come to mean so much to him. He's very Han about it. he ends up just getting angry and trades parting words of like, well, we'll give you the privacy that you want then, and barges out of the room, because that's what Han does. When he gets defensive and scared, he gets angry and says mean things. And that's always been Han Solo, and that's what he's doing in this moment. But this is such a big point for Qi'ra. Like, I don't want to skip over that we've spent so much of this book with her talking about how she wants connections, and she's had this safe house that she was proud of, but then that safe house, you know, she's like, is it really that great when Han and Solo see it and it's really just a hollowed out spaceship? Or how she was so proud of her clothes and then her clothes got ruined, or how she wanted to broker this meeting or bring a bid to this meeting and then the meeting falls apart, and how Qi'ra's constantly been in search of connections and doing and achievement of things, and how, you know, even when she's able to kind of run the mission with the Wookiee, she's worried she runs it wrong, and now she's being offered an opportunity to learn all of this stuff, that it's being gift wrapped for her, that here's a woman that sees herself in Qi'ra that would want to teach Qi'ra. Qi'ra is being offered everything, but her friends would have to go back. You know, it seems like such an obvious choice, but does she want to leave the slums without her friends? What does that mean? Does she still trust this engineer? You know, she could go and join this engineer and it could be terrible. She could be swearing herself over to another master, basically, that would abuse her still, just be in a nicer place. And is it, you know, what decision do you make then? And she's basically being torn with, her heart doesn't want to leave her friends, her mind says, you have to do this. And how is she going to deal with that? And that's a decision that we're going to see play out over the book as the book ends. But it's just wild to me to see Qi'ra here and see, I mean, I don't want to spoil the book for you, but if you've seen Solo: A Star Wars Story, Qi'ra is still with the White Worms, right? So however this shakes out, Qi'ra ends up with the White Worms. So to see Qi'ra on the precipice of this great opportunity for her life to go and do what she could have always wanted, and to know that it's not really going to go the way you think it ought to, and then to see where she's at the end of Solo, where she's been with the Crimson Dawn and been in another really bad situation, and now is running off to Maul to do who knows what. You know, it's something special to see that journey with her, and I'm excited to see that play out in the last couple chapters of this book. Okay, so that's what I have to say about these 2 chapters of the book. I am excited to explore the end of the book with you guys. Please leave me a comment letting me know what you thought about it. However, we have a little bit of order of business. We have, after this video, 2 more videos about Most Wanted, and we'll be done, which means it's time to start talking about our next book. Now, I will likely take a short break in between discussing this book and the next one, not one near as long as I did between Bloodline and this book, but maybe a week or 2 off, just to kind of reacclimate, especially because Rise of Skywalker will be out on Blu-ray, and I'm going to really up my content on that. But we need to start figuring out what we're going to read next. Now, my first thought is Dark Disciple. Clone Wars is back. Clone Wars will be wrapping up by the time we would be starting Dark Disciple. It might be a good way to kind of continue the Clone Wars vibe. I've been wanting to read Dark Disciple for my Redemption series that I talk about off and on the channel. It's not been really regular, but I've done a couple videos for. So that's a book I want to read anyway, and I think it would be fun to read that book with you guys. However, what I constantly see in comments and messages on Discord is people really want Rogue One books, so Rebel Rising or Catalyst. So I think right now, even though I also really want to journey into doing a Legends book with you guys one day, I think right now the top 3 books are Dark Disciple, Rebel Rising, or Catalyst. So you guys watching this video right now, the people who tune into these videos every week and are actually on this journey and are actually reading these books with me and actually stay in these videos long enough to watch all the way to the end, you are the people I really want to hear from. So please tell me, is there another book I didn't mention that you guys would like me to discuss or go over or break down? Or do you have an opinion with Rebel Rising, Catalyst, Dark Disciple, what we might read next? Please let me know. If you're not already, follow us all on the socials, and I will talk to you guys next week.